I am really, really excited because you had your book birthday yesterday. So congratulations. It's always an exciting, but yet very, very crazy week when you have your book come out. And I am so excited that we are getting to celebrate this with you. Everyone, this is her debut sci-fi space opera kick-ass book. So I am so excited. I am going to not ramble on too much, but essentially, our main protagonist, his planet is destroyed. That is not a spoiler. It is in the book description, so I can say that to you. And then he goes on an epic quest of adventure with many aliens and a very interesting spaceship and many other things that you will have to continue listening and read to find out about. But before I pass it on to Veronica, I have 2 house rules. This is our Vanna White section for you, everyone. If you have questions, which make sure you ask questions, that's the most fun about an event, and it's why you're here, is to get to interact with the authors. If you see down below where it says ask a question, that is indeed where you can ask a question. Just click it and a little button will pop up. And also, the best way to celebrate a new book is to buy it. I am a bookseller. You knew that was coming. And what is really, really, really cool is that we actually are offering signed and personalized copies of this book. I'm like, during a pandemic, those are hard to come by. I'm just saying. It's a really good book, and you get a signed and a personalized copy. I mean, what are you waiting for? But I am going to go ahead now and pass it off to Veronica. You guys are in for such a treat, and I will see you at the end of the event. Goodbye!
Thanks. Oh, that was a great intro.
That's great.
Hi. Okay, so how are you feeling? Books out there?
Books out there. I'm tired and excited at the same time.
Yeah, that sounds right. The life of an author.
Right on track.
Excited. I'm mildly nauseous.
Yes.
Well, I thought I kind of wanted to start with your sci-fi origin story, which is to say that I wanted to know why you got into sci-fi, or what were like the first things that you read or watched that were sci-fi related.
Yeah, that's tricky. Actually, in my teen years, I read a lot more fantasy. Like I read through the big fantasy series, but I was studying science nonfiction. So like my interests were all in researching scientific topics and philosophy and stuff like that. But my fiction reading was a lot more fantasy, which now that I think about it, maybe explains a lot about my book.
Yeah, it's like the perfect union of those two things.
Yeah. So it's like the fantasy feel, but the scientific concepts.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that before. But yeah, so my studying was a lot of science, more so than absorbing science fiction. And
yeah, what kind of science were you research? What kind of research were you doing? What kind of science were you doing?
What kind of science? It makes me sound like a mad scientist, which I wish. A lot of like quantum mechanics and astrophysics and cosmology and vibratory physics and like sound and music. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Some of the big ones.
You sound like bashful about it, but I'm just like, wow. First one knows a lot more than I do about the universe.
And my interests are always so broad that when someone's like, what is the 1 or 3 things? Like, I cannot pick them.
Yeah. Sorry, I went blurry for a little while there. Okay, so as far as Nophek gloss goes, though, I said that right? I feel like it's phonetic. I was wondering like where you got started, because it's such an expansive, there's so many elements at play in this book. So I was wondering where like the little nugget of the idea was, if you can even remember.
Yeah. So, and I think you mentioned this in an interview before, where you start with a concept rather than like a character.
Yeah, usually.
Or plot. Yeah. So mine was a concept, or more of the setting. So the bubble multiverse came first. Just imagining that gigantic structure of individual spherical universes all kind of stuck together and nested within each other, with different physics in each one. But I obviously needed a character to explore this, because you can't just have a setting. So it went from the concept of the bubble multiverse structure to the implications of that, like the economy and like who would populate this and what would it mean that the physics changes, like what cool things could we do, and the spaceship, which can generate a universe of its own and can traverse safely within that protective shell into any universe. So that's like, okay, cool world, got a cool ship with cool implications, and I needed a character. And his backstory was a seed that actually started the plot and the themes of the book. But it did all begin with like the bubble.
I was imagining, like when I was a kid, I liked to blow bubbles in milk, and my mother prohibited this practice because she found it very annoying. And that was the first image that came to mind when I was reading.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm very much like, get really into details, like out in nature or like watching nature documentaries and things like that. Like just the tiny macro details of stuff is really cool, like amazing structures. And then to either extrapolate that into something huge or like make it a magical or a scientific idea for fiction. It's like very much my jam.
Yeah, I always recommend to people that they watch the deep episodes of like Blue Planet or any of the water-based documentaries, nature documentaries, but mostly I'm like a David Attenborough person. But you can see, I mean, essentially like aliens basically in those parts of the world that we don't see, we're not familiar with, so they feel alien to us.
And people ask a lot, like, where do you get your ideas, like, for weird aliens or whatever? And I'm like, Earth? Like, there are so many weird creatures and, like, interesting biology and stuff on Earth to get inspiration from.
But you did have a lot of variety, and I was kind of curious on, like, a writing level, if you keep some kind of, like, codex or glossary, like, how are you keeping track of all these different alien races?
I do have like my research file or like my world building files, but they're kind of slapdash. Like I haven't had time to sit down and like world build a bunch and go into detail with like a world Bible before I started writing. And as I'm drafting, I'm kind of world building on the fly. So I tend to shove notes into a document, so I have it somewhere, but I often forget and it just all lives in my brain.
I really only know like one or two people who are organized about this stuff. So I think people have this idea of like everyone, like I don't know who authors who are like famed world building people are like with as far as
the whole manual.
Yeah, it's like, wow, that sounds great. I totally do that.
Where do you have the time? And I know it's gonna come and bite me later, like when I can't keep it all in my head and I'm like books in the future, I'm gonna be like, what was that thing or what did that look like? But for now I can keep it all in my brain, so it hasn't been a problem.
Luckily you have like the manual that you can consult, which is the book itself. So
yes. And I've done that before.
Search, replace and stuff a lot. Well, okay, you referred to the ship, and I wanted to talk about ships because I think anyone who enjoys like space opera in general or any kind of space things has their favorite spaceships of fiction. So do you have any that come to mind?
Favorite spaceship? I'm not sure. I think like my brain instantly just says the Enterprise because I grew up watching The Next Generation. Right. And like holodeck and replicator and like all this technology, and like, why don't we have that now?
I know, I'm still waiting for the beaming.
We just teleport to work.
One of my favorites, which actually kind of reminded me a little bit of yours, but not too much, but just a little, was from Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, because the ship that Binti uses to cross the galaxy in the first installment is like a living ship that they're inside of, which I thought was such a cool idea. And then when the ship in your book turned out to be kind of like responsive and like an entity unto itself, I was like,
I love like biotech, and I tend up making my technology really organic, just like it veers that way on its own. And I love ships with AIs, but I knew I specifically didn't want like an AI intelligence or an AI intelligence that could speak, but I still wanted it to have some personality and like to interact with the main character and the pilot without having sort of a normal language. Yeah.
Oh, why not?
I guess because there's a lot of that already. Like there are a lot of great AI ship books.
Yeah, sure.
So I wanted to kind of do something different, and also just the challenge of it, like to try and achieve that sort of symbiosis and communication using like sound or nervous system connection or something sort of odd would be more interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was more inventive this way and then more connected on like a deeper level, which is such a big factor in this book. Everyone's kind of like emotional journeys that they're on and the way they're trying to process things I don't know, just kind of work together in a nice way, which I like.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, and I can't not bring up your sound-based magic system as a sound designer.
I totally forgot. Chosen One is a book that I wrote earlier this year.
Right. So your magic system has like humming and whistling and singing desires into being, which obviously sounds awesome. And if it was a film, like as a sound designer, that would be so much fun to like sound design this entire system of the way things manifest in reality through sound. So I get the quote. If magical energy is like water, then certain frequencies are like channels in stone that provide pathways for particular workings. And I was wondering what made you pick sound specifically?
Man,
for the system?
I had not connected the fact that you do sound design in your day job to the sound in this book. So I'm going to try not to sound like an idiot about sound. But I chose it because I wanted something that kind of married science fiction and fantasy together in a nice way, because I knew it was a fantasy book. It's the first fantasy that I've written, I guess. But my brain like doesn't work that way, really. I need things to feel like measurable and concrete. So I thought that sound frequency was a really good way to do that, because there's kind of the romance of music and singing, and we kind of think of that in a very kind of poetic way, but then it's also measurable. A frequency has like a number assigned to it, and so I thought that would kind of strike a nice balance between the two. I mean, Chosen Ones is very much like sci-fi and a fantasy book mashed together with its parallel universes and then its magic, and so that's kind of why I picked it. It wasn't enough on its own, because if it was just that straightforward, then I couldn't account for variations in magical skill level. Because if it's just something that you can replicate exactly every time, then then no one can do that or work.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I like how you did implement like sort of the technology and the siphons, like this is jewelry that people wear, to augment their capability. And another thing I really enjoyed in Chosen Ones was the idea of magic not having a good socio-political outcome, no matter its rules or regulation. There's another quote that I highlighted. We are animals after all. Nature is bloody, and as a whole, it favors strength over compassion. And I felt like this theme was really strong, especially in the interstitials in the world building, but maybe I was inflating that theme because I find it so fascinating. But I was wondering if it was something you wanted to explore on purpose, or if it came out as like a byproduct of putting this magic system into the society the way that you did.
I think it happened by accident. I was just trying to think about, like, no matter what powerful force exists, I guess I have like a kind of grim view of humanity.
Right, they're just going to misuse it.
Yes, just that like absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whole philosophy. And I find this to be an interesting aspect of writing science fiction and fantasy, which is that it kind of like shows you yourself when you're writing. Like, oh gosh, I guess I do believe that.
Right.
And that was like kind of a byproduct of it, that magic would be misused, but then also that the people who are against it would misuse whatever power they have over it, and it would need to be people would want to regulate and control it. And
and even good intentions can sometimes go the wrong way, just because we're humans.
Yeah, and then with the siphons particularly, they're these like elaborate devices, but like with an iPhone, you can they're expensive, so people can only afford the best ones if they're already wealthy. So it kind of like increases this gap.
Yeah, the status symbol, the visual status symbol of it made total sense. Like obviously, we would do that.
We would do that. Bummer.
Yeah, look at my nice throat siphon.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's very, very true too. Kind of
but also that like not just the siphons, but that like the clothing fashion evolves to expose the siphons that are the status symbol. It's like all fit together really well.
Yeah, well, thank you. Oh man, it's been a while since I've even talked about the book in public, so I'm like, right, you wrote this book, remember what's in it?
You're like the ghost of author future. Like, that's gonna be me. I'm gonna be like, the bubble what? Like, what about the ship? Like, my brain's already on book 3.
Yeah, so it's a trilogy, right? So you're
Yeah.
working on the second one right now.
Yeah, I turned in my draft for the second one, so now I'm trying to get my brain to the end and, blend it up and knock it down.
Yeah, okay, so do you have a plan for how you're like parceling out your world building? Because I imagine it's just going to be like expansive from here endlessly, sort of. So do you have like something you're looking forward to in particular?
Yeah, like this first book is very much Caden's story, and it's pretty linear, and it's very like character focused, which makes it more insulated. Like, I don't quite explore as many worlds or species that I sort of wanted to in my head. But I know the next book, if I've hooked readers, I can like really expand the locations and also like different dimensions and play with consciousness and some other cool topics in philosophy. And then, of course, the third book has to be even bigger, so it's going to escalate, hopefully, into this big multiversal conflict.
You're giving me trilogy writing flashbacks.
Oh,
like,
no.
Oh, no, it has to be bigger.
I know. And even, like, people commenting on all of my strange ideas, I'm like, I need to do even better. I need to one-up myself the next book, like, come up with something even cooler.
I think you'll be just fine. You clearly have a very inventive mind. So my favorite thing about the book is that it keeps its emotional core throughout. I sort of referred to this earlier, but it says in the summary, like the very first thing that happens in this book is just like really intense emotional trauma. And I think it would be tempting to like sort of bury it in favor of action, but I think the book strikes a really nice balance between like carrying you forward through this narrative and then never forgetting that this character is dealing with this really profound thing. So I was curious to know, I'm like going to take notes. How you balance those two things as you were writing? Was it like the work that happened in revision or, yeah?
Well, and this is something that struck me reading Chosen Ones too, because like we have a lot of really similar themes, but like completely different world and execution. So like both our main characters are struggling with PTSD and like trying to move on emotionally from events that have happened. Like with Caden, the events are really fresh, and with your characters, they're a decade ago. Yeah. But it still keeps, like, events keep coming back to them, or they keep getting drawn into events. Like whether it's, Caden encountering some of the people, like the faction responsible for what happened to him, while he's trying to kind of integrate into this new world, or like your characters getting pulled into a memorial, like press event where they have to like get back into like all of those memories. So that theme of, not trying to move on, but not being able to escape or process. But to answer your question, that was sort of the drive from the very beginning, like from that big inciting incident, that just propelled him the whole way. And since he doesn't really get the breathing time to like stop and process, and like doesn't listen to the adults around him saying like, get therapy, we'll get you on a safe world, like we'll like sort of enclose your world perspective again, because it gets broken open from this like tiny isolated world that he knows, like didn't even know about space, and then suddenly he's in this gigantic diverse world that he's trying to integrate, while he also has this grief that's too big to integrate, and his response is just to kind of keep pushing himself forward towards something that is really simple, which is where the revenge plot came along. It's like, his single focus is a survival mechanism to keep him going amidst all of this.
Yeah, I think the strength of it is, especially about it being a revenge story, is that it's propelled by his emotion, his trauma, or whatever. So it's not that like he's feeling things on the side. It's that like he's feeling things and they are driving him toward a particular focus. So I think that probably accounts for some of the propulsiveness of it, because it's just like this man on a single quest to like, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, against something insurmountable. But I think this year, and I don't know if other people will relate, but that idea of like, one thing that's keeping you going as you're overwhelmed with like everything else going on, you're like, I can survive. I'm like one foot in front of the other. Like, this is the thing I have to do.
Yeah.
We can do that much.
I guess your year was sort of driving toward this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's coming out.
Mm-hmm. Well, like amidst all this, the deadlines don't go away. So it's be creative and write this whole book during COVID and fires and social unrest and this whole, everything going on.
Yeah.
But it happened.
It did. You did it. Someone in the Q&A asked us both how we parcel out our world building throughout our stories so that we don't info dump, but still strike the balance where readers have enough information to get immersed and engaged. Do you have?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think just I ended up with a good setup by default, like by starting my character who's, really ignorant and only knows this tiny little world, but doesn't know any of the bubble multiverse. And then him discovering that with the reader in increments. So I'm not like, if I had started with a main character who's like a veteran of this multiverse, and dumped the reader in there and trying to get them up to speed with what the character already knows, it would be way too much. I would spend so much time trying to explain things that we wouldn't get into plot or character very much. So by starting really small scale and then gradually expanding his perspective and the readers at the same time, I could get things explained to him and sort of integrated one by one. So I was real lucky.
Relatedly, I was curious about the choice to make him young at the outset. Because, I always think about the book that wasn't written, like, oh, well, what would happen if this character had been 20 years old when this started? Obviously, it would have been very different. And I think you made a really smart choice, but I was wondering why you made that choice initially.
Yeah, so my original idea for the character was when he's older, he's like 30, and like already the difficult option where I would be throwing the reader into the world that he already knows. But as part of trying to get to know the character and what kind of plot I could do, I was figuring out his backstory. So like, how did he get a hold of this ship? And like, why is he special? Like, what does he know? So I went all the way back to a concept when he was really young. And it was supposed to be like maybe a short story or a little prologue or like, one of those things that you write and then put in your in your world building folder and then write the real story. But it just kept going and ended up being novel length, like the idea of it and the themes of it. So kind of by default, he was young because I started so early. And we wondered if it would kind of be a hard sell, a young kid in an adult novel. There aren't a lot of those. And
right.
Just the balance of getting the reader on board with such a young perspective. But the whole rest of the cast are adults, and the plot that he's up against is really mature, and the things that happen to him are like he's asked to be mature the whole way along and try to keep up. So I don't think it feels quite like YA.
No, I don't think so. I think a lot about where these categories end and start.
This goes along, but like the whole theme is that he's.
Uh-oh. We lost her.
We'll give it 1 second. This is the voice of Mysterious Galaxy.
The voice of God. Are you back? We can hear you.
Sorry about that noise.
No worries.
My cat just crashed a glass. This is the intermission of the event where fuzzy animals run crazy and the internet decides to, yes, interpretive dance by Veronica Roth. You didn't know this was going to be the secret intermission that you had tuned in for, but...
I think my cat's still sleeping. What a good boy.
And Essa, right now we can see you, but not... Or hear you, but not see you.
Oh, I can see me, so hopefully I will pop back in. I cannot see Veronica.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Right.
I could answer a question, or we could just keep chatting if we can hear each other.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Yay.
All right, good. Before our intermission, I was thinking about how much I think about the difference between YA and adult. And I really keep insisting to people that it's a thematic difference because it's about like who the book is for, and if it speaks to adolescent concerns, then it's more, hopefully categorized as adult. But if it's about like a single-minded quest for bloody revenge. I mean, there could be YA. That's about that. But, it's most likely to make sense.
Exactly. And like when
he gets older, so.
Yeah, he ends up an adult at the end. And like when I was when I found my agent and then my editor, like they both completely understood the themes and like what I was trying to do. So I was like, yes, like you got it, and you know where this is going to fit.
That's great. Yeah, you need someone to understand what you're trying to do. I think you froze again. No. Okay. I think you're back.
Oh, hello.
All right. Awesome. I'm just going to poke my head in the questions and see what we got.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I have one that I want to ask from my own. Okay, so often when I talk to other writers about kind of books that require a lot of research, so the thing I'm thinking of mostly is historical, they talk about like the difficulty of knowing when to stop researching and when to like let yourself invent. But I think that's something that sci-fi fantasy authors have to deal with a lot too. Not research necessarily, but like when to let go of the science and when to embrace like the fantasy.
Totally.
Because, like no one has figured out how we're going to interstellar travel or, do any of that stuff. So I wondered for you, as someone who has studied science, how you figured out like where to let that go.
Yeah, and I definitely have to stop myself from researching too much, because I'll just go down rabbit holes and then like I've lost days of writing. Like what happened? And it's easy to convince yourself that like, oh, this research is going to come up in the book somewhere. Like you're going to feel it on the page. Mm-hmm. But many of those rabbit holes aren't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I end up doing a lot of world building on the fly rather than sitting down and trying to build things outside of the draft. So I'll draft and then I'll need an idea, or I'll want to make something more robust in the moment. And then I'll, zip online or pull out a book and then do the research that I need to fill out the holes that I'm feeling as I'm drafting, and then keep going and try and keep that momentum up so I don't get bogged down. And that's maybe a good metric. Like if I'm keeping my drafting pace going and I'm engaged in the story and I'm putting in just enough details and stopping to research for just those things that I need, then it's going to have an energy to it rather than, stopping a lot or trying to shove like big blocks of cool stuff. And I would love to like nerd out on the page about, the topics that I find really cool, or, the holographic universe physics of this particular bubble or whatever it is. But I know that's just not gonna, there are probably some readers who would be into it, but I try and focus on get deep perspective on the characters and keep the plot flowing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to write the book. Otherwise, you're just researching for fun, which is great.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's probably the opposite approach where you like put in all the world building and then you do passes after to carve out what you don't need. I could imagine that being an approach. Yeah. But I don't know if it has that much time.
No, I do know people like that, but I'm like, I don't know. I only do the research that's required for the book. And sometimes it ends up being a lot more than I anticipated, as with Chosen Ones, actually. But
and I'll often like bookmark things. Like I'll have topics that I'll find really interesting, and I'll get enough to put it in the book as like a concept or an explanation, and then I'll be like, I want to dive into that for myself later.
Yeah, that's
whenever I have time. Yeah,
this mythical time that you'll have.
Oh, I had a question for you on the research topic. Yeah. So in Chosen Ones, there's a bunch of magical artifacts, and one is Koschei's needle. And I rarely see Russian or Slavic folklore used in like contemporary fantasy or even like contemporary fiction. And I was really excited to see that Koschei the Deathless was featured. And I wanted to know how did you pick which artifacts to feature, and how did the needle become the focal one?
Yeah, so I think the reason the needle became the focal point is that because it is Slavic, and my family background is Polish and German.
Mine too. I'm part Polish, so I was like, yes. So how did this in a book?
Polish folklore all just like becomes Russian folklore at a certain point. It's sort of like, I'm sure there are some distinctions, but when you're doing research as like an American who doesn't speak Polish on the internet, so I just like naturally gravitate toward those stories. I think there's a like really appealing kind of like fatalistic bent to a lot of Slavic folklore that I just really love it.
Me too.
And then of course, Koschei the Deathless is just like a really interesting story and kind of made me think of the antagonist that I was trying to build. So then the needle felt like a natural thing to incorporate. So that's why I chose that one. The other ones, I mean, I really just I was a little careful with the artifacts because I didn't want to just like mash cultures that are, that, I don't know, mash other cultures into my moral paradigm. So I tried to pick cultures that had like a powerful position in our current like American culture, so that it wouldn't feel like as gross. This is like a really hard thing.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Yeah.
But I tried to pick things where I understood the significance that they had to the culture that they're part of, which is to say that they weren't like sort of religiously significant, because I just, I didn't want to be disrespectful. So, I picked like the weird magic bullets and like the horn that like no one believes in anymore, like the stuff that felt kind of like even the people who are part of that culture think of it as like this funny kind of like mythology story. So that was kind of my focus. And I just wanted to pick like objects that were small and you can hold them and, that kind of thing. And that theoretically like our government could get on loan from Sweden or whatever. But I did enjoy that research a lot because there's just so many interesting and obscure stories surrounding like small objects out there.
Yeah, I could see if I was doing that, I would just go down all of those rabbit holes, like this cool thing and this cool thing, this one.
I know. Yeah, I had like a big wiki, like, because that's where I start, with the wiki, and then try and go to the actual, like a more reputable source. No offense, Wikipedia, you're great.
Right. It's good for like popping around and figuring out what you need to go deeper into when you're not sure what you need.
Yeah, exactly. When you're just like, wow, I know nothing. Like I don't know any of the questions to ask. Yeah. Okay, let me look at the cues in case. This is just an informational question, but is there an audiobook of your book?
Yes, there will be one March next year.
Awesome. Okay, great.
Bit delayed.
Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Is there a sci-fi trope you were most excited to write or to subvert besides the AI ship that you mentioned?
Ooh, a trope. I don't really think in terms of tropes. The tropes definitely show up, but it must be subconscious because I'm not like, I'm going to put in this one and I'm going to put in that one. So I can't think of anything that I was consciously working with. I work more with themes and messages and emotions in the characters than with tropes. But Veronica, you very intentionally subverted tropes like the Chosen One and the Dark One. And you've written, like the Diversion series was Chosen One kind of story, right? So what made you want to play with subversion this time?
I think it's because I wrote Diversion that I wrote Chosen One. Because I just like played it straight, with Diversion, like she's special. And because I loved those stories as a kid, because I think I like always hoped that I was special, and then when you become an adult, you're like, well, you're not. So get over it. But when I was a kid, I loved them, so I tried to do that with Divergent. But then the more young adult literature I read and talked about and saw in movies and made into movies and stuff, I kept thinking about like these people would be traumatized. Like really, like that's a little bit of a funny thing to say, but it's also quite serious. Like, if you were famous across the world for murdering a guy, even if he really deserved it, like that would be really hard to deal with. So that was kind of, it was like the unanswered question that drove me to write Chosen One. Yeah.
No, it's not good. And I think you mentioned in another interview, like wanting the plot to be moving forward, but also like the idea of evil getting more complicated and the morality kind of grayer because they're adults revisiting the experiences of their past and like reflecting on what that was and who was involved and like the good and the bad in it.
Yeah, I had a professor in college who taught us about trauma narrative. I don't know if this is like was just her observation or if it was a general observation, but we read the things they carried. And she said the trauma narrative is like a spiral because it returns to the same stuff, but it gets deeper every time. And I decided to have that as a structure for Chosen Ones because like in the past, they did like their straightforward, like heroic act, but then they have to kind of do it again. But it's different the next time you go through it. Sort of similar to a trauma narrative.
Yeah.
That was okay. I'm looking. For both authors, are there any current social issues that motivated you or will motivate you further in the series? Or are they integrated into the protagonist or are they integrated into the antagonist more? But social issues?
Social issues. It's kind of interesting because so I wrote the book last year, the year before. Like the book was finished, and then the themes and ideas in it ended up really relevant to this year's. Yeah, nice. So it wasn't a reaction to it, but it ended up kind of timely in a broad way.
Yeah,
which wasn't intentional, but yeah, I think it relates really well. And since this first book covers a lot of that, I think the second book is, the themes aren't the same. So it'll be covering different ground and getting broader and more complex. And I'm dealing more with politics, but I'm not great at writing politics. And so they always seems to center on like the individual at the core of whatever the group is, or like the one message at the core of whatever that faction is. So I tend to try and narrow it down because like I can do character. I'm not good at like the big politics, but I can do character.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough undertaking.
Yeah. So even as my multiversal conflict is expanding, I'm really focusing still on character and character relationships and interactions.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a smart way to go about it because, I mean, if this year has taught me anything, it's that really, like, still politics is just like a collection of individuals. So, you can still have, like, stuff happening, but you don't have to, like, try and encompass this whole group.
What about you? Are you reacting to...
I'm sort of with you. I don't react directly to the stuff around me, mostly because, I mean, I do, like... on a deeper level. We all do. We take in what's around us and we process it on the page, whether we want to or not. But what I think people observe when they read books is that, I don't know, you just try to put as many true things in your book as possible. And then people see the ones that feel relevant to the time. But there's also other stuff that's in there that like, you know.
And like I knew since I had this young character and, he's trying to mature and evolve emotionally, and he's with this group of adults. I wanted in the book to put in as many kind of, I don't want to say universal truths, but like deep life lessons and like little tidbits of things that a lot of people need to hear. And like Caden can't often absorb it, but maybe the reader hears a piece of advice or like a little line that is something that they need to hear at the time, and it won't
be gentle with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like all these little things, and it's not going to hit every reader the same. But I think you can go through and take what you want out of it, whatever place, whether it's like you need to learn about self-care or anger or discrimination or like all these little things that he's facing. They'll get sort of a life lesson, sort of bit about it, and so I hope people get the sort of more universal reflection out of it, and that makes them think more critically or think deeper or stop and reflect.
I think it also, world building reflects priorities, right? So you developed, I'm sure, very intentionally a society where there's a lot of diversity and inclusivity and variety in terms of like gender expression and sexual identity. And so, that stuff is not like necessarily a social commentary.
Yeah, it can be hope. It can just be hopeful. Be like, this is the world that I would like to see. Where it's like, diversity is the norm here. Like, it's great.
Yeah, it's nice to invent a universe where you don't have the same like built-in stress. Like you have different built-in stress, but not the same.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see. This is a good one. What part of this book was the most challenging to write, and which part brought you the most joy? Were they the same? For me, that was the same.
Oh, what was it?
Oh, well, just like the interstitials in Chosen Ones. So for anyone who hasn't read, Chosen Ones is told with narrative sections, very straightforward from one character's perspective, and then interspersed throughout are these what we have been calling, me and my editor have been calling interstitials, but they're documents. So there's newspaper articles and poetry, and there's a product review. There's a lot of articles and government documents. So those were the hardest part of the book to write because it was just like really condensed world building, and a lot of decisions had to be made, and then a lot of different voices. So like, I don't know how to speak government speak, but I read like hundreds of documents for this book.
Osmosis.
Yeah, I was like, it'll bleed in. But the funniest part is that I had read all these government documents, the declassified ones that you can find on the internet if you're curious. I read the MK Ultra ones, which was our government's experiments using LSD in like the 60s and 70s. Disturbing stuff, guys. But anyway, I read a bunch of them and I kind of absorbed the voice a little bit. And then in copy edits, my copy editor was like trying to correct passive voice a lot. And I was like, no.
It's all passive.
Yeah, like no one's ever responsible for anything in government documents, so it's pretty funny.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but it was a joy to do it. It was so fun.
And the interstitials were like struck me right away when I was reading. I was like, this is such a clever way to move the world building outside of the narrative, so the narrative could just be the characters. Like you get really intimate with the characters like right from the beginning, because you don't need to describe the history through their eyes or like engineer ways for them to be thinking. Yeah, you don't need to flash back the whole past. So I thought it was really clever to offload the world building into like these different formats. But I could see how it would be difficult to figure out where to fit all of those in, especially since it's sort of like a beeline that's informing what we know about the plot and like some of the characters in the plot.
Yeah, I had to get rid of a couple. My editor, John, was like,
do we need this one?
Yeah. Okay, so what was the most challenging part for you, right?
I think I kind of had two things going on. So I had a coming of age story, which was a lot slower, and I had a revenge plot. But initially, they weren't really tied together. So it was sort of a meandering coming of age.
How does one come of age by taking revenge?
Yeah. So it was like meandering and lots of bonding with the crew, and it was, it wasn't really moving. And I struggle with antagonists sometimes, so a lot of that was having an antagonist problem. Probably the funnest was also the most difficult. So I had to marry the coming of age plot with this revenge plot and like get it moving. So since I have two antagonists. One is like the mysterious distant figure that like no one has ever seen, and like their headquarters are completely unknown to anybody. But that's not really going to work because it's not something that the protagonist can come up against until the very, very end. So I knew I needed like a proxy antagonist to be actively
my favorite.
actively engaging with him. And that character, Thray, was always in there, but in kind of a minor role. So I was like, I gotta boost this guy and like get him really knotted up in the middle of the story, which is where it was sagging, where it was like just coming of age, kind of, kid coming to terms with this world and his new family. So I used that proxy antagonist to really wrench
to great effect.
Middle and propel towards the final conflict with that real antagonist. So I think that worked. That part was really, really fun, getting that to work. But it was definitely a challenge initially to get like my two ideas of what I wanted to do with the story working in tandem.
That makes a lot of sense. I love thinking about that now. Coming of age and revenge story don't feel like they're that related, but you did it. Oh no, did we lose you again? Okay, no, you're good. Okay.
I don't really. Yeah.
All right, I think
here.
You're here.
You're in and out.
We are, in fact, out of time. So I guess it's a good time for us to freeze a little bit. Maybe I can find one more question.
I can hear you, but you're clippy.
Okay. Uh-oh.
I think I jinxed us by saying that my internet was behaving today.
We can still hear you, though. So, maybe it is the internet gods or the tech gods.
Oh no.
Ladies and gentlemen, you might witness part 2 of Interpretive Dance as we wait. for her to come back online. But in the meantime, right?
What kind of dances can I do in just this area?
Voguing moment where we bring back Madonna, please. But
you got entirely.
oh,
okay. Well, we were ending, so that's really not a great farewell.
Oh no, I'm so. We were all joking too about how Crowdcast is always such an abrupt ending, and this was more of an abrupt than we'd planned for. But the last question I always like to follow up with all the authors participating is, what are you currently working on right now? Because as we had talked about, the book you just had come out is not the book you are currently working on. So I always like to give people when you are jonesing for the next book from the author, what you can expect next.
Oh boy. Well, I feel weird answering because this is like Essa's show, so I'm like taking over.
No, I'll pretend I have like a really cool black shirt on and much better lighting. So I just work with me on this, people. But so she is working on book 2 and book 3, as she mentioned. I'm so sorry to be speaking for you, Essa. I feel so rude right now, but I want people to know that you're working on book 2 and 3. So
someone asked in the chat if it was a trilogy, and we have confirmed it is indeed a trilogy. So get into it.
Exactly. It's a trilogy, and that is what she is currently working on. We love you, Essa. I hope you're still there and can hear us virtually, sending you lots of love for book 2 and 3 as you're working on them.
Yeah. Now I gotta know what's happening next.
Right.
Okay. As for me, I can't even talk about it. I am taking this like big social media hiatus to work on my next book. Yeah, it's been interesting.
Mental health is a thing.
Yeah. Oh my God, did we get it back? Yay!
I'm going to say what you're working on.
You did a very good essay. Thank you.
Anything to add?
Oh no, is it glitching?
No, you're here for me.
I can still see you both.
I can see and hear both of you.
We're on our last legs.
I know.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm working on book 2 and 3 next.
Yeah. Okay. Very exciting. Yeah, I'm working on something I can't talk about. I don't know. I'm right now.
So what I always like to do then follow up for this is to find out about secret things and updates. I know you're on a social media hiatus right now, which I very much applaud because mental health is so redonkulously important. But for where people can find updates about your stuff, where may they find such information?
For me, my website is veronicarothbooks.com, and I have a newsletter that I'm still active on, which you can find a link to on that website.
Awesome. What about for you, Essa?
Awesome. Essahansen.com. I have a newsletter as well, and I'm active on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook author page.
Yay, awesome. Well, I do not wish to tempt the internet gods anymore. And also as that time of the night where we do have to say goodbye. So I want to thank you so much, Essa, for celebrating your new book with us. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you both for having me.
Wyatt, I know you're all jonesing for a good space opera. We have so many people come in asking for a good space opera recommendation.
There you go.
Robert read. And thank you so much, Veronica, for stepping in and moderating and joining us in conversation.
Enjoy.
Thank you to all of the readers, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you all.